If that's something that you want to do. We're starting to figure out where well, since it's 12 o'clock or just after, I'll go ahead and kick this off and get started. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Erin Ferris-Olson, and I'm the Equal Justice Coordinator for the State Bar of Montana, which means I spend a lot of my time focusing on trying to find ways for legal needs to be met and access to justice to be promoted through the practice of law. So you probably hear a lot about pro bono and the provision of pro bono legal services. I focus mostly on modest means. Today's presentation is on limited scope, so trying to find ways for attorneys to meet currently unmet legal needs through their practice models. I want to thank you all for coming today. It's so nice to have some of you in person. When Steve and I were walking in, we're like, this weather, I don't know if anybody's actually going to make it over here, so I'm really glad you guys are here today. And I think we have quite a few people registered on our webcast as well. On that note, I just want to mention, this is the first time we've done like a series of free ethics pleas. This plea is free because it has a significant access to justice component. If you appreciate having this ethics plea for free, I would encourage you to contact the bar, let us know if this is working for you. We have had some challenges with this plea in particular because of the webcast, because of the technology associated. But with the attendance that we're having, it would be really great to have some feedback to know whether this is honestly worth the State Bar's time and capacity to try and facilitate these types of events, because it hasn't been without a lot of work on our part to make this happen. So if you like the plea today, I'd encourage you to contact us and let us know if you'd be interested in this or similar pleas in the future. Maybe you might have a comment as far as you would have paid $10 for this plea instead of getting it for free. That's really helpful information for us to know as well, so that we can start to offer more of these types of services in the future. So with that, we'll go ahead and get started. Can I just get a show of hands? How many people have already practiced what we call limited scope representation? Stuart, is this a familiar term to you?
Not in a legal context, not literal or limited scope.
Right, limited scope at any level of fee. Some hands? How many are just totally unfamiliar with the concept of limited scope? Some of you are just deciding to be shy today, which I guess will be fine for now. How are we doing, Kevin?
Good. I think you got like. All right. It's like okay. Whoops.
Great.
Is that all right?
Yeah, that's perfect.
Okay.
So limited scope representation is also called, or can be called, unbundled legal services or discrete task representation. This is a little diagram that I just came up with because I think one of the biggest challenges, and I'm just going to pass this around, I don't need to have these back. They're going to be posted on the State Bar's website as we revise our materials, and I have them. Anything that I pass out today that I don't have copies for everybody, feel free to email me and be happy to send it to you. I'm already bombarding you with quite a bit of paperwork. I didn't go overboard. But this is a visual that I set up because a big component of limited scope representation is just making sure that the client genuinely understands the type of services that they're receiving. So these are some definitions. This piece of material has been vetted by those in the Access to Justice community. It's a little wordy in my opinion, but I have it in Word version if you care to pare it down. What the printout also has is some of the legal services that are available that provide these different types of services. Today we're just going to be talking about limited scope representation. And this is a broad presentation. I mean, the content today is going to apply to limited scope representation, whether you're doing it pro bono, at a reduced fee, or at a standard fee agreement. But, you know, obviously we're hoping that limited scope is going to be a means by which people can offer reduced fee and pro bono services in a convenient way that burdens less of your time as an attorney volunteer. So limited scope representation was specifically ordered by the court in 2 different orders. They're listed here. One amended the rules of professional conduct, while the other created rules in Montana Rules of Civil Procedure. The first rule of civil procedure that was added is 4.2, and this just clarified that providing limited representation does not constitute an entry of appearance as an attorney, and that that you may enter a limited appearance, but that doesn't mean that you're under the same parameters as a regular retainer or representation agreement. Rule 4.3 identifies when you are, so there's, we'll talk about this a little bit, there's limited scope representation where you don't actually have to file any notice of appearance, and then you may, in some cases, want to file a notice of appearance, and that is what 4.3 has to do with. It has to do with filing a notice of appearance prior to or simultaneous with a proceeding, and this is going to happen mostly when you're appearing in court, or when you want to control communications with your client, and we'll get into some of those specifics later. But one thing that 4.3 also addresses in B is that you don't actually, if you file a notice of appearance, you don't have to actually request permission from the court to withdraw, as you would if you were representing somebody full scope. Rather, all you need to do is file a notice of completion with the court if you file a notice of appearance. Rule 11 has to do with what has been commonly referred to as ghostwriting, which clarifies that you do not need to sign pleadings or documents that are filed by a self-represented litigant. If you helped somebody draft something, there's no scope on how much drafting you may do for this individual. If it's a limited scope agreement, you don't need to sign that document. One important thing I think to point out about E is the second section, which I have underlined, which is that the attorney may rely on the otherwise self-represented person's representation of the facts. And I have some example documents which I'll pass out here in a moment, and one of those is a retainer agreement. I make sure to include in my retainer agreement a statement of candor, which means that the self-represented litigant is saying affirmatively that they're telling you the truth, because this is really all you have to rely on, is that the information that you're getting from the individual is true. And I'm sure there's a lot of experienced attorneys in here. I can already see that. You know, we've all been lied to, and that's a significant reality. And when you're representing somebody in a limited scope, you're going to want to put some very clear parameters and have a very honest conversation with your clients, both that they understand what you're doing for them and that it's their expectation to tell you the truth. Because you're not going to have as much opportunity to delve into the facts of that individual situation and possibly find out the truth of the situation for yourself. Okay.
May you do this without having a limited scope entry of an appearance in the case, or do you have to have that and this?
This is totally different. So this is just if you're drafting, and you don't need to enter a limited appearance just to draft. Does that answer your question?
Yes.
You do want to retain it. These are some of the requirements of a limited scope arrangement. You want your attorney or your client to give you informed consent in writing, that you're going to be representing them, and C1, 1 through 3 has some exceptions to that requirement. Those are if it's solely a telephone consultation, which some of you may find that you do already, right? I mean, if you get phone calls to your office and you provide an amount of advice over the phone, that is a limited scope amount of assistance to an individual. So that is already sort of assumed to be okay without written informed consent under the rule, which I actually think is one thing that's really helpful about these rules, is in many ways it clarifies the appropriateness of some of the activities that we may have been doing already. The second exception has to do with clinics. And you saw some brochures out front about our First Judicial District Advice Clinic. These are services that are provided by nonprofit legal services organizations or court annexed organizations. Our clinic here in Helena is provided by the local pro bono committee. These are already contemplated as exceptions to needing written and informed consent. That being said, our clinic here in Helena does have written informed consent in the application that we have people fill out. And I'll actually have an example that I'll pass around later today. And finally, that the court appoints the attorney for a limited purpose. So if you're appointed by the court to represent somebody for a specific task, then you're relieved of the need to execute a retainer, as long as you think it's clear enough in the order. I mean, if the order isn't clear, then you probably, best practice, execute your own retainer that makes sense to you, and most importantly, makes sense to the client. We'll talk about amending a retainer a little bit later, but this is where Rule 1.2 comes in as well. It needs to be in writing, and if you change it, you want to make that in writing as well. Communication with persons represented by counsel. So an otherwise unrepresented person, I think this is what I call, this is the reason why you want to, if you have a retainer agreement, and if it's important to your limited representation of the individual, that the other attorney know that you're representing them. So if you're representing somebody for a period of time, from the beginning of for a parenting plan, for example, from the beginning of filing a complaint until they get the ex parte parenting plan in order. If that's the time period you're representing somebody, because of the nature of the case, you may not want the other attorney contacting your client directly. And in that case, you're going to want to let the other attorney know that you have this limited scope retainer agreement. It doesn't mean you have to file a limited appearance with the court, but you're going to want to communicate to the other side the scope of your limited representation so that that communication can be handled appropriately. .3 is what I call the don't be shady rule. It's really important that you're being clear to everybody, not just your client, but also the opposing parties, the scope of your representation. You can't act disinterested when you're actually representing somebody, because the information that you communicate to the other party could be very misleading. So here's where I'm going to go ahead and pass out these materials that we have. I'm going to show you kind of what I use to get these going at the end here, but these are sort of a mashup of the different examples of a limited scope retainer, a notice of appearance, a notice of consent to limited scope, and a notice of completion. I just liked these the best. I kind of took different pieces from various forms. I do have them in electronic form, so if you want that, go ahead and email me, and I'd be happy to send those to you in that way. Okay, well, I don't have enough copies, so you'll definitely get them via email if you don't get them today. Limited scope retainer is the most important thing. When to execute, early and always. I guess we had an example of where you maybe don't need one if the court order is so explicit that you think it's clear. But, I would still execute one because, again, the most important thing, and I'll repeat it many times, is that the client genuinely understands the scope of your representation. And what happens is, when you execute a retainer, is you have an opportunity to have a conversation about the representation that you're providing. And that is the opportunity to get to that point of clarity. What to include in a retainer: an affirmative statement of the understanding of the relationship, a statement of candor, as I mentioned that earlier, that helps you kind of rely on your reasonableness of your understanding of the truth, what the fee arrangement is, the specific tasks that are provided, a time frame if you're limiting your representation to a certain time frame, and then maybe other details like communication strategies, reasonable client expectations, etc. Both in the fee arrangement and in the other details, you may find yourself putting into a limited scope arrangement or retainer more information about how to work with you than you normally would with your regular clients. I think we have a lot of a broad array of practice areas in this room, but if you start to do limited scope at a reduced fee or in a pro bono capacity, you're going to be working with people who have probably never talked to an attorney before. And so some of the assumptions that you're able to make with your clients that know what an attorney is and know how to communicate with an attorney, you're going to have to make those a little bit more clear when you're talking to people who haven't been represented before. What's the reasonable expectation to get a return phone call from you? When are you going to contact them? What is your preferred method of communication, whether it's email or, be nice to my staff. Sometimes these people are kind of in a crisis and in an emotional situation. You can lay out those parameters early on and avoid some of the burdens that often come along with working with a high-risk population. Oh, more things to include in your retainer agreement. In terms of the scope, these are some options. So in terms of the scope of services and client expectations, you can just have a description, which is the example that I've given you. Some people who practice limited scope a little bit more often in a particular area will actually include a checklist. So for example, in a family law case, you may say, I'm going to help you with the petition, the proposed parenting plan, the child support. And what that does, I think, especially for the client, is it shows sort of the whole array of services that could be provided and what you're providing. Again, some of these people have never interacted with the court system, so they may think that by you saying you're helping them with a petition, they think that once you're done, they're done. But by having a checklist, it might help illustrate that a little bit more. Similarly, in the example I handed out, I have what you're going to help people with and then what you're not going to help people with. So that's another way that you can kind of illustrate that there's a lot more out there to tackle that person's going to have to work out on their own. Amendment options, whether the agreement automatically terminates and whether you want to amend it by written agreement. Under automatic termination, you would then be probably writing a new retainer for additional services that are provided, or you could just have it amended. You could have the agreement can be amended by just an attachment. Fees, clarification of fees. Some of the things that folks who are hiring an attorney for the first time don't understand are how a retainer is actually used, and also the amount of fees that may be charged after a retainer is used up. So some of those things, that maybe you don't have to explain in your current retainers for clients. And conflict of interest. This is something that is unique to the limited scope scenario, and that is largely so. The reason why there's kind of an exception to conflict of interest for certain aspects of conflict of interest for limited scope is that legal services clinic model that we were talking about earlier. In some more urban areas, we don't have clinics like this in Montana yet. I think it's largely because of our size and our cultural dynamics. We're a bunch of small towns. But if you have a bigger clinic scenario, you may sit down and talk to somebody not having done a conflict check, not thinking that there will be a conflict check necessary. You find out at some point that there is a conflict of interest. You are able to withdraw from the limited scope representation based on that conflict. That's sort of like a whole different topic for a whole different day, is conflicts of interest in the limited scope or clinic environment. But this contemplates sort of broadening those types of activities and keeps them. As far as the notice of appearance and completion, these don't always have to be executed. when they are, it needs to be prior to or simultaneous to the representation. So if you're helping somebody, for instance, if you're helping somebody in our limited scope advice clinic here in Helena, this happened to me, and they had the clinic was on Thursday, and they had a hearing on the following Wednesday, and I had a distinct feeling like they just needed somebody there to make sure everything went okay. I mean, their ex parte order was exactly what they were looking for, and so, but the other side was represented, and so I was like, well, if I'm just there, I can kind of like keep the ship afloat, and that would be great. So, all I did in that circumstance was file a notice of appearance that day, that I was just going to be there for the court hearing and just make sure that things went okay in that instance alone. So you don't have to do it before. You could actually do it the day after, which makes it pretty convenient. You may want to do it, obviously, court appearances, if there are involvement of other professionals, so other attorneys, or, you know, I mean, maybe there's advocates, or, you know, I think that's really the only example we have in Montana of professional, maybe a guardian ad litem. You know, if there are other types of professionals involved in a case and you want to try and, you know, or even you feel like you have a responsibility under 4.3 to inform them that you're not disinterested and you are helping them in a limited scope, that's when you may want to file a notice of appearance. What to include: scope of representation, specific tasks, time frame if available, and what else? Actually, when I was preparing for this presentation, I found a consent to limited scope appearance, and I was like, this is weird, because I actually didn't know that that was a thing, but I think it's not so much required by the rule as it is a best practice for the attorney to not only say that they're limited scope, but for the client to say that they understand that it's limited scope. And I think what this sort of plays into is really kind of preserving, I've never used this term before, but it's kind of like representation creep, you know? And that's the concern of a lot of attorneys who enter into limited scope or file a notice of appearance, that the judge is gonna say, oh, but I really want this person to have an attorney for the rest of the case, right? And that's why you don't need to request approval from the court to withdraw, right? You just file a consent. But if the litigant is also saying, well, I really would like my attorney to be here, I called them, I haven't heard back. If there's a consent to the limited scope agreement where the litigant has affirmatively stated to the court, I understand that this is limited scope, that leaves a lot less questions out there as far as, you know, did you do a good job at being a limited scope attorney? These are the major issues. The limitations on the scope must be informed and in writing. Changes must also be in writing. Limitations must be reasonable under the circumstances. So if you are talking to somebody about a limited scope arrangement and you can tell that their case is considerably contested, limiting it to 1 month of representation is probably not reasonable. So those are the types of the decisions that you'll have to make in deciding whether or not limited scope is appropriate. And then there's this case out of California. I haven't seen this manifest itself in Montana. It has to do with the representation creep concept as well. What is your duty beyond your arrangement to advise on related matters? And there may be some duty.
Aaron, was that case out of California? Was there a limited scope agreement there? Except even though you're on limited scope, you still have this larger personal?
Yeah, I believe so. It's been a while since I read it. So there are a couple of different ways you can divide up limited scope, and I'm going to pass these around now too. And there's more outside. And I don't need to take these back with me. And we have more of them at the state bar. So I think the law library might have a small stack of them too. I'm not sure. There was like a whole box last year. So, but this is a really great guide to communicating with clients, drafting agreements. There are examples of the checklists that I mentioned earlier. There's examples of checklists in there because there's a couple of different I kind of have like two different ways I think that you can do limited scope, and one of them is limited scope by issue. So you just identify certain aspects of somebody's case that you can help them with, and then they handle the rest of it on their own. But that also may mean that you're sort of helping them through the whole case just on this one issue. And you just want to draft your retainer agreement to reflect that. And then there's limited scope by task. And I think this is a lot more common just because it's a lot easier to define. Again, limited scope is a great opportunity for you to kind of control your time and energy as the attorney, and that's a lot easier to do if it's just one task versus one issue over the course of somebody's case. And the asterisks represent the types of tasks that can be provided in a limited amount of time, and these are the types of tasks that volunteer attorneys at our First Judicial District Advice Clinic are providing. We'll talk about the clinic. Basically, it's a 30-minute appointment where you as an attorney get information in advance about the client. You meet with them for 30 minutes, you do what you can in those 30 minutes, and then they're off and you're off. It's kind of like a no strings attached pro bono opportunity. But these are the types of things, and I was really excited when I was making this presentation because there's actually a lot of things that could be provided in just 30 minutes. And we have examples from our volunteers, our experienced volunteers doing all of these different things. So this next part is resources for your client. And this really came out of our experience at our First Judicial District Advice Clinics, and I've had the opportunity to travel the state and see other advice clinics. There's quite a few that have popped up, and I'll provide contact information for all of those who are attending remotely today. But what happens when the person, you help them draft their petition, and then you're sending them off, what happens next? And what can you provide them to be more effective or most effective on their own as a self-represented litigant? Well, first of all, there's the State Law Library. Lisa's here, that's our state law librarian who coordinated this presentation today, and our court-based help program, which for those of you who are familiar, it's the self-help law centers that are located throughout the state. And I'm actually curious, how many of you on a regular basis refer people either to the State Law Library or the Self-Help Center? Our Self-Help Law Center in Helena is downstairs in the State Law Library. And I will tell you that we have challenges getting people to the Self-Help Center here because it is so far away from the courthouse. And so a lot of people end up down at Montana Legal Services, which is great in terms of signing up for a pro bono attorney, but there's a lot of resources that are online and available, and there's a walking, talking, reading, and smiling person, especially Nolan, he's so full of smiles, here at the State Law Library. And then Susan, of course, our reference librarian, who I'm sure you guys utilize as attorneys, is also willing to help self-represented litigants. So actually in Helena, we're incredibly lucky to have that huge resource, and I would encourage you to learn more about the program and refer people to the Self-Help Center.
Erin, what's the phone number?
The phone number for the Self-Help Center is 444-9300. And let's just go ahead and show you a little bit of information about the program. That's the State Law Library. Oh, that was Nolan. So you're probably familiar with the court's webpage. And this Represent Yourself button here will get you to all of this information. Here's a 10-minute video on how to represent yourself in court. So if you're helping somebody that's then going to appear in court by themselves, this goes over how to introduce an exhibit, to say your honor, how to get dressed, find out where the courtroom is, make sure you're there on time. Some of these details that, again, people who haven't interacted with the court system yet maybe are not so familiar with. And here's where the locations of the Self-Help Law Centers are. If you want more to know about, if you want to know more about the Court Help Program, we've got our program brochure here, frequently asked questions. The policy and procedures manual for the program will give you every possible detail you need to know. The program is predominantly run or staffed by AmeriCorps service members. So there's a lot of turnover in the program every year. So a lot of what makes the program work is all here. There's a lot of information. And then you can click on the area of the state and find information about your Self-Help Center. There's no one. If you happen to be helping people outside of the Helena area, a lot of these services are traveling. So for instance, Nolan provides services also to Jefferson, Madison, Beaverhead, Deerline, Granite, and Powell counties by appointment, and then his schedule is listed here. Other things to be aware of on this site while we're here, there are self-help law stations and self-help law kiosks across the state where people can get free forms. If they want, for instance, if you want to craft your representation as just reviewing a self-represented litigant's forms, which would be a huge service, and the judges would love you for it, you can direct people to any of these locations to get the forms, and then they can fill them out or do their best and bring them to you for just a document review.
Whose responsibility is it to keep those things full? Because if they say, well, I went to the courthouse in a small town here, and there wasn't, the thing was empty, you know, is it the duty of the court clerk to say, okay, we make more copies, or is no one supposed to be running around doing this, or?
It's a relationship between the court help program and the court. So if they're out of the forms, most of the clerks who've agreed to have a station are going to just make those copies. But otherwise, Nolan does the job of keeping those staff. If they're empty for some reason, they can just call Nolan and he can actually mail forms to the individual's house. So, you know, there's a lot of options. Super helpful. And then we also have community resources listed by county. So these are community resource guides that are updated yearly by the Justice for Montanans project. And these are very broad in nature, but it's just a comprehensive list of the different types of resources available by county. So the self-help centers can provide legal information, they can provide forms, they can provide procedural information, and the self-help center can review forms, but only for completeness. So if something doesn't make sense, the self-help center can't draft forms. They can't advise anybody on what they should put in their forms. They can just say, well, you're missing page 12, or you didn't fill out this box. That's the type of stuff the self-help center can provide. And that's, you know, we look at legal services on a continuum, self-help being on one side and full-scale representation on the other. What we're finding is we're kind of coming in from both angles, and limited scope and reduced fee are provisions of services that we're hoping can fill in the middle. If you want more information about legal information versus legal advice, our May 4th presentation also here at the library is going to be on supervising non-lawyers, and we'll get into the specifics of what is not legal advice, and those are the same guidelines that the Self-Help Center follows. And then Montana Legal Services. Montana Legal Services has pro bono lawyer and mediation referrals, and I want to emphasize that here in Helena, because actually in Helena we have a long list of volunteer pro bono mediators through Montana Legal Services Association. So if you're talking to somebody over the phone, or if you're representing somebody, the advice that they should and could resolve something through mediation is legal advice. That's something they can't get from the Self-Help Center, but you could provide that, and they could go through Montana Legal Services. The assignments for mediators happen a lot quicker than the assignments for pro bono representation. So that's something that we're also just really lucky to have here in Helena. We don't have like Bozeman, the Community Mediation Center, as an entity that does that exclusively, but I mean, I'm on the pro bono mediation list for MLSA, and if I wait more than a day to respond to an assignment, it's gone. So that's just a sense for how quickly those are processed. People can sign up for MLSA online, or they can call the hotline. Either one works. Montana Law Help is a wonderful resource, and you probably saw that on the website that I was just at, because we link back and forth to each other. Has anybody looked at Montana Law Help yet? Is this new stuff? Okay. Montana Law Help is great. It's designed to be very user-friendly for the public, and it provides a lot of general legal information. So while the State Law Library has most of the forms that are approved by the Supreme Court Commission, this will link to those forms, but not duplicate them. There will be different versions of the form. There'll just be additional information that people can use to answer some of their questions. There's also interactive forms on Montana Law Help. And I just want to show you how these work, because they're a really great opportunity for providing limited scope representation. The best way to use these is to first of all, go to the questions to answer before you go online. This is a PDF. When I'm providing limited scope in this capacity, what I do is I print up this PDF and I say, here you go, fill this out. It's like 30 pages. And then they're already overwhelmed, but they don't realize that the Dissolution with Kids packet is 90 pages. So you just tell them, like, trust me, once you have, because what this has is all the information that they'll need to go onto the interactive forms and fill it out very quickly. So that's the first step, is pull up this PDF, have the client get together all of their information. And then if they have a computer, or if they want to use one, they can go to any of the self-help law centers, or the kiosks, which are computers located sometimes in courthouses, but most often in public libraries, and those are listed on the court help page. Those are free to use and free to print with. So if they don't have a computer, they can go there and use those.
But once they answer the questions in the first PDF, they're still going to have to fill out the rest of the forms separately. They don't populate. It's not like a smart system that populates the...
Well, this could be a smart system, right? If they just go onto this interactive, they could just answer questions, and I'll show you. You want to make sure, a couple notes, a couple glitches, you want to make sure they sign up to save their work, because otherwise it's not saved, and that's really problematic. Because, and I think this is what you were getting at, Norm, this takes a really long time if you don't have the information already. And that's why we encourage people to compile the information before they sit down at the program, because they get discouraged and hopefully they save their work, but it may mean that they don't actually complete the program, because it's a long time to sit in front of a computer. I mean, it wouldn't be long for any of us, but...
But if they do it separately, they're going to have to put it in first and then use that information to fill out the forms later. They're not going to be able to use the material to fill out the forms once they've created the first PDF answers.
Right, because the first PDF is just handwriting it. It would be the good option for somebody who doesn't have a computer at home, but needs to go home and just collect that information. They could just go to this program though. If the duplicative aspect of it was frustrating, they could just go here.
Question on these, because I've advised people when they fill out the forms, they get it all done, then they have to go in and change it. They seem to have a lot of trouble doing that. There's the PDFs, you can't always change the field. They save the PDF. It's I don't know if they've actually used this interface, but I've had a lot of people show up with PDFs that they filled out online, and there's some things they have to change, and then they're like, well, I don't know how to do this. I think I'm going to have to start the whole form all over again.
Right.
So
That's actually, yes. We have had PDF fillable forms on our website before. I'm not sure how many of our forms are still in PDF fillable for the exact reason that you're describing. However, people can and do find forms that are not on our website, right? Because LegalZoom and some of these other entities have picked up these forms, and so they're in other formats, and you may be seeing that.
the other problem with them is that sometimes people complete the PDF, they print it out, they have a hard copy, but they can't seem to save the completed hard copy to their own computer either. So
And that's an Adobe issue because you have to have a certain, a certain program. Well, but the public doesn't generally know that. What's good about the interactive forms though is you don't get a PDF, you get a Word document at the end. They get a Word document that they can either print or they can email. And so we've had folks at the self-help centers when we've been low on staff go home, fill these out, email them to the self-help center. They could similarly email them to the clinic, email them to you as a limited scope attorney, and then you don't have a PDF, you have a Word document that you can manipulate and change and make fileable, essentially. Some of the other features on Montana Law Help, are a live chat feature. Thought I could get there faster, but that didn't work. And this live chat feature is staffed by, right over here. Need help finding information? Chat with somebody. And I think Melissa is tired of me demoing this every time I do a presentation, so I'm not gonna burden them with that today. But this is staffed by Justice for Montana's members, so the folks who are staffing the self-help centers, and also attorneys at legal services. There are some volunteer attorneys outside of the organization itself, I believe, that also staff this line. So somebody can actually chat online with an attorney. All of these websites are accessible from the remote kiosks that I was talking about earlier. The other thing I just want everybody to know about is that MLSA is MLSA is currently launching a new program. Well, they're in their kind of research and interview stage, but they're trying to start a new program called Montana Pro Bono Connect, which would be to offer limited scope pro bono services statewide, because we have a lot of clinics popping up in different areas throughout the state, but we still have people that don't live anywhere near where these clinics exist or even attorney resources exist. So it's like an online portal, and they will be recruiting attorneys to assist with that. Sometime in the next, I think their goal is to have a certain number of attorneys by the end of 2015. Am I just missing something, guys?
What are you trying to do?
Trying to get out of this mess. It's just the webpage.
Try to rate
Try what?
that. Try to rate that. Not up there. There you go. Ain't worked out. Fine. There.
What was your suggestion now?
Now it's good.
What are you trying to do?
You're trying to get out of that page.
Well, just click on that and go to wherever you want.
Well,
Those boxes office.
Yeah, just something that's slide, should be able to slide over.
yeah, that's not, no sliding is happening. Okay, well, that's all right. I can wing it from here. So the other thing that we have that you guys can be aware of is the State Bar has put together these guides. They're too big to email, so we're getting them put up on our website, but you may have already noticed that your new desk book has an updated legal resources page. This has more information about legal resources and some of the resources that I've described today. I will pass 2 of these out. I don't have to get these back. So if you really like these, you can go ahead and take them with you. We'll be talking about them at the May 4th plea as well, because what this guide is really designed for is to try and get people to the right service at the right time. So that when people are contacting you for pro bono representation, they've already been to the self-help law center and seen the self-help law forms. What this guide has in it is our desk book page, but then on the back, the description of legal advice versus legal information, which is a guide. The idea is that this would be an office guide. So for some of your paralegals or office staff or anybody who's answering the phones or interacting with the public directly to get people to the right place a little bit quicker. And then after this, you have a description of all of the legal services that are listed on the desk book page. So a brief description of what they do, maybe some added contact information if I couldn't squeeze that in, is there. And then there's a whole series of attachments, and what the attachments are actually handouts for many of the services that are described on the desk book page. So for instance, our lawyer referral services brochure, our modest means fee schedule, this type of stuff. This is what the entity itself is giving out to the public. So if you find yourself making a referral over and over and over again, you can just pull it out of this little book and hand it to them yourself. Or get maybe a better printed copy. But at least you know what these entities want you to be communicating to the public, so we can all be communicating consistent information. I'm sure there's a lot of government attorneys in the room. You know, how frustrated do people get when you're the 4th or 5th person they've called instead of the 1st or 2nd person they've called? What we're trying to do is kind of reduce that anxiety and save everybody a lot more time. And hopefully by the time these individuals get to the courthouse,
They're a little bit more happy and not burdening our court system as much either. So it's really an efficiency model that we're working towards. My next slide, I'm just remembering, was about the state bar services. And that is the lawyer referral service. The lawyer referral service is free for the first year, and then it's $125 a year every year after that. We've added categories, so you can now actually advertise yourself on lawyer referral service as reduced fee or a limited scope attorney. So those are specific areas of the law that we are now encouraging people to advertise themselves, largely because the referral to an attorney is legal advice that cannot be provided in a self-help law center. So if there's somebody in the self-help law center that's looking for an attorney, they're going to be sent to the lawyer referral service or Montana Legal Services Association, because they do provide services for low-income individuals for free. So that's a lot of the motivation for allowing attorneys to advertise themselves in that way. I would add that that was actually asked, we were asked to do that by our members. So there were attorneys that specifically wanted to start advertising in the self-help center, for instance. But this was our way to solve that problem. And then I'd encourage you also to look at the Modest Means fee schedule. The Modest Means program is designed to help people within 200% of the federal poverty guidelines, which is a little bit above what they would need to qualify for Montana Legal Services Association. But the Modest Means program was largely designed with limited scope in mind. That you would provide, as a volunteer attorney for Modest Means, you would provide some level of services at a reduced fee that somebody could afford. And so this is the schedule that we have. It's free to sign up for Modest Means. Clients that get referred through the Modest Means program have started with MLSA. So if you want to refer somebody to the Modest Means program, you send them to Montana Legal Services. Montana Legal Services does the financial screening, and then they're sent to the state bar. The state bar makes a contact with the Modest Means attorney and the client, letting them know that a referral has been made, and then your time is tracked by you communicating back to the state bar how many hours you spent on the case. What happens in that whole interaction is malpractice insurance from Montana Legal Services extends to your representation. So if you're a state attorney and you don't have malpractice insurance, you can take a Modest Means case and you will be covered. After 50 hours of Modest Means representation, you get a coupon for a free plea from the state bar. And that's about all that there is. It's free to sign up, and it's actually a great way to build a practice if you're interested in doing that as well.
Double click on the blue above that.
Just like those back there, guys.
There.
So this is like in my presentation now? Oh, okay. Wonderful. Okay, now I get to test myself and see how I did. See if you see new information. Oh, I did include the link, but we don't need to go there because we've gotten a little behind. But the lawyer referral service has been revised. So you can now provide a link to your law firm, you can provide a picture, you can provide a description of yourself. There's a lot more information that you can do to actually look like a real person on the lawyer referral service, which I hope is probably just better for the way we appear to the public at large. And here are some of the limited scope clinics that are located throughout the state. There are some brochures out front. If you want to sign up for our advice clinic here in Helena, I'd strongly encourage you to do so. I'm going to pass out, this is the application that I was discussing about the clinic. Let me describe how it starts. So if a client wants to get some advice, or actually, when they start with their legal issue, they don't know that they need advice. They have no idea what an attorney does. They're just frustrated and need to solve their problem. They usually end up at either the Self-Help Center or Montana Legal Services. After they talk to self-help staff or Montana Legal Services staff, they may be referred to the legal advice clinic. At that time, we have them fill out a legal advice application. And what this does is it narrows down their issue to 3 questions for their limited scope attorney. And then on the back, you'll see that they actually fill out a limited scope agreement as part of their application. So they're affirmatively already stating. So
you know, I mentioned how there's this exception to clinic models where, you know, you don't have to have an agreement, but we like to keep everybody safe and not rely on those backdrops. So we actually have them fill that out before they even get to you. Then, once we have a group of people signed up for an advice clinic, we will send out those names and the opposing party names to all of the attorneys who are signed up for that week. So then you do your independent conflict check. So back to conflict checks and how maybe there's an exception for limited scope clinics. We do best practices and do a conflict check anyway. So you won't be in that circumstance either. Based on your conflict check, you are then paired with an experienced family law attorney or an experienced clinic volunteer. So you will be able to sit down, come to the clinic and sit down not only with the clients, but with an attorney who may be able to help you. You can also, I think I had the question last time, can you go on your own without as a partner attorney? Absolutely. But we do provide that, especially for not only young attorneys, but if anybody's in inactive status, like some of our law clerks who are here today. It's a great way for you to be able to kind of get to know the public, have that client interview skills without being in active status because you have an attorney working with you. When you're paired, when you're paired before the clinic, you will also receive that clinic application and any other forms that we were able to get from the court. So you'll have a lot of information, I think a lot of information, about the individual before you sit down and represent them for 30 minutes.
Once they fill out the application, where does it go? And who has access to it?
Yeah, so the application goes to it can be submitted in either the Self-Help Center or Montana Legal Services, and it will be uploaded to a secure site where the clinic coordinators can download it and send it to you once you've identified that you don't have a conflict with that individual.
Okay, so you will get a copy of that with the signed agreement for the limited scope.
Right. And in the meantime, also from the time they sign up to the time of the clinic, our self-help staff are following up with the individual. They're calling them to make sure they're going to show up. We've had the clinic going since February of last year, and we've only had 2 real no-shows. So that's something.
How often are they clinic?
Once a month. And Lisa, do you mind grabbing the sign up for the clinic on the front thing? This is the first opportunity actually to sign up for our upcoming clinics in June, July, and August. We don't have September scheduled yet, but if it's something that you're interested in doing, I would highly encourage you to sign up because actually you'll see that some of the spots are already filled because a lot of our attorneys really like to use this as a way to fulfill their pro bono commitment. It's really easy, very low strings attached, very few strings attached rather. So I would encourage you to sign up now because actually the sign up gets filled up pretty quickly, which is great. If you have any questions about the clinic, you can contact myself or Trish Clanky. We're the clinic co-coordinators. And then for those of you who are listening in remotely, there are also clinics in Bozeman. The contact for that is right there, Pamela Poon. And Western Montana Bar Association in Missoula has a clinic as well, and you can contact Angie Wagenhals. First Judicial District and Western Montana Bar, those are both local bar programs, and I think that's something that's really cool and something that we should be proud of, that it's actually our local bar that is this initiative. Gallatin Legal Assistance Clinic is essentially a group of attorney volunteers within Bozeman really wanted to see this happen. Again, most of these have popped up within the last year to kind of fill that gap that we were talking about earlier in the continuation of legal services. So I also have signups here. If you don't want to sign up for a specific clinic date, but you would like us to contact you in July or August when we get our September, October, November schedule going, you can just fill out one of these to the best of your ability and drop it off. We also ask about training opportunities or additional assistance you may need in volunteering. We do provide free CLE opportunities for our pro bono volunteers. So there's actually, I think, quite a bit to gain from the program as a whole. Any questions? That's all I have. Oh, more resources. www.probono.mt.gov.
If you haven't been here yet, the statewide pro bono coordinator, Patricia Bain, has been doing a wonderful job of making this a clearinghouse for information on attorneys who want to provide information for attorneys who want to provide pro bono assistance, but there's also information on limited scope. So if you go to resources for attorneys, you'll see limited tax representation. Here are the orders that I already referenced in the content of the presentation. Guides and manuals and examples. The examples that I passed out today were largely built off examples that I found through Patty's materials. She's been tracking this issue for a really long time and is a great resource in terms of limited scope as well. So that is really the end. So. Yes.
Can you go to the screen that had the website for state law library self-help.com or whatever it was called?
Yeah. So I'll show you how to get there from the main page just because you may be directing people over the phone on how to get there. So it's just courts.mt.gov and then represent yourself, but it can also be /self-help. You don't have to do the NCPX, so you can get there. Yeah, there's a whole, I mean, there's really so much information that has been developed. The key is really, honestly, having you and other people who interface with people with legal needs knowledgeable of the information so that we can just, we've got a lot developed, it's just getting it out there. Great. Well, I'll just pop back to my contact information. There I am. So if you have any comments, additional questions, if you want electronic versions of any of the information that I passed out today, if you want one of these, I could make them for you, but you're going to have to stop by the State Bar to get it because I can't, it's too big to email, as I mentioned. And I would just keep yourself apprised of what we're doing at montanabar.org because we're putting up a lot more information. Well, we kind of reorganized information, but we're putting up a lot of information on what an attorney can do for you, how to communicate with your attorney, information for the public to try and help facilitate a better and more successful attorney-client relationship. So that's what we're working on. Thank you guys for coming.
Emergency question. Well, there's two people in the audience that are actually going to want to get CLE credit for this presentation.
Yeah.
Do they need to do anything over and above just having signed that or fill that in?
Were you gonna do this? Is this what you're submitting to the bar?
Yep, that's all you need to do is sign
There
that.
you go.
So
You don't have to file a separate form like they started doing.
But I would encourage you to volunteer.
Library self-help. Would you like to bring these?
It's Barry, C-A-R-R-Y.
And then,